HIPAA doesn't have a definition for minimum necessary, but it provides a framework for providers to create internal rules. Minimum necessary standards are covered by two sections of the privacy rule. Section 164.502 introduces the rule. Section 164.514 explains what an entity must do in order to comply. Generally, a provider must use reasonable efforts to limit PHI disclosures to intended purposes. There are 6 exceptions to the rule when the minimum necessary rule doesn't apply. The rule doesn't apply when PHI is disclosed for treatment purposes. It doesn't apply when the patient is receiving their own records. It doesn't apply to records covered by assigned authorization. It doesn't apply when HHS is requesting the records. It doesn't apply to workers' compensation or OSHA cases. It doesn't apply to OCR audits. There are 4 implementation specifications in Section 164.514. On the topic of uses, an entity must identify persons or classes of persons who need access to carry out their duties. The provider must identify categories of PHI such as billing, clinic notes, radiology, etc. For each category, the provider must consider whether conditions are appropriate to such access. After all things are considered, the provider must make reasonable efforts to limit unnecessary access. The provider must use standard protocols for routine disclosures. Non-routine disclosures must be reviewed according to criteria. A provider may rely on the requesting party's judgment if such reliance is reasonable. A provider may automatically respond to requests from public officials, covered entities, business associates, and researchers. These requests are presumptively reliable. The covered entity is responsible for limiting the scope of their request to achieve the purpose of the disclosure. Disclosing an entire medical record without assessing the purpose of disclosure is per se a violation of the minimum necessary rule. HITECH modifications were published in January 2013. The proposed rule promised future guidelines for business associates. Now we'll examine the minimum necessary rule in the town of Single Peak. Computer Guy and his girlfriend Gail work in the Old Town Plaza district. Gail writes for the local newspaper, and Computer Guy owns a store. Gail is leaving work early because she has a doctor's appointment across the plaza. She's going to see Dr. Priscilla Pruitt. Gail is very worried about her condition. She didn't sleep well last night.
Good morning, Gail. So when are you and Guy getting engaged?
Did you really just ask me that question? I need to talk to Dr. Pruitt privately.
Gail put on a gown and waited for the doctor. While she was getting her vital signs taken, Gail's mind flashed back to her childhood. Dr. Priscilla was the first doctor who diagnosed her with congenital heart disease. Today, Gail is 25 years old and she's worried about pregnancy.
Hi, Gail. What brings you here today?
Guy's been talking a lot about us getting married. I never did tell him about my congenital heart defect. This morning I did a urine test and discovered I'm pregnant.
Pregnancy will put a lot of strain on your heart.
Is it safe for me to be pregnant?
I'm going to refer you to a specialist in the big city.
Does my insurance cover genetic testing?
I'll find out. We'll come up with a plan.
Oh, good. I want to know more about the risk of pregnancy before I say anything to Guy.
Priscilla gave Belle a list of places to call to find out the best plans to contact to learn more about Gail's options. A short time later, Computer Guy came by.
Is Gail still here?
No, she went back to work.
Did she tell you the news?
What news? You mean her pregnancy?
Wow. I didn't know. You really mean she's pregnant?
Hudson overheard this conversation and rushed into Priscilla's office.
Priscilla, we've got a problem.
What happened?
Belle disclosed Gail's pregnancy to Guy.
Sounds like she violated the minimum necessary rule.
What was Gail supposed to be doing?
Case management. She was using and disclosing information to coordinate high-risk pregnancy care.
She was accessing Belle's insurance information.
The minimum necessary rule requires good judgment.
Tell me, what was the purpose of Guy's question?
Guy was looking for Gail, but she had already left the office. Belle thought he already knew about Gail's pregnancy. Should we revise our policies and procedures? Maybe Gail should get more HIPAA training.
I don't think that's necessary. HIPAA requires us to identify persons in the workforce who need access to records to carry out their duties.
And then we identify the categories of PHI.
We won't impose any conditions on Belle's access to records, because Belle needs access to everything. The next thing I'm going to do is call Gail and explain what happened.
HIPAA provides a framework for minimum necessary rules. A small office usually allows their staff to access everything. The security incident that happened in this story should be discussed with Belle and documented in writing. Thanks for watching. We have more tutorials coming. Thank you in advance for comments and suggestions.